Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, what he told 60 Minutes about what he told President Trump before the Iran war about the Strait of Hormuz, and importantly, what Trump told CBS after watching that interview. And for the first time since the war began, Netanyahu on camera offers specific numbers on Iranian nuclear scientists targeted and killed, and describes its new supreme leader as physically weak, hiding, and beset by internal divisions. American cruise ship passengers airlifted from a hantavirus-stricken vessel, returning stateside under quarantine to a medical facility in Nebraska. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in New York, where I just returned a couple of hours ago from a flight from Tel Aviv. Welcome to the Takeout. Wow. Am I glad to be back? I don't know if you miss me, and it would be arrogant for me to assume that you might, but I most certainly miss you, and I miss this show when I'm away. As you might know by now, I was on assignment in Israel for several days to interview Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Interesting footnote. We were told after the interview it was the longest TV interview the Prime Minister had ever done, which is interesting because he's the longest-serving head of state in Israeli history and by far the most media experienced and the most media savvy. The interview ran some 90 minutes, and you can watch it all in full on YouTube. We traveled to Israel because right now so much, quite obviously, hangs in the balance. Two ceasefires, one with Iran, one with Lebanon, both appear to be hanging by a thread. Negotiations to end the war with Iran appear to have minimal momentum, and hanging over the Middle East and the energy-dependent global economy, the specter of a return to all-out war, something President Trump keeps threatening, and Netanyahu, in our conversation, did not rule out. We will play many news-making moments from the interview, including Netanyahu's take on the health and actual influence of Iran's supreme leader and what he regards, but has never said before, as the most significant Israeli accomplishment in its war with Iran. Get my camera straight here in a second. I'm back in New York. Everything is a little hectic. But we will start with what has proved to be a nagging Achilles heel in the war strategy and has become quite obviously an economic pressure point worldwide. That is the strangling by Iran of the Strait of Hormuz, and then the subsequent U.S. naval blockade done as a response. Was this choke point, we wondered, factored in as a pre-war risk? I asked the Prime Minister about extensive New York Times reporting that in pre-war conversations with President Trump, the Prime Minister and his team asserted Iran would not choke off the Strait of Hormuz. Listen.
The problem of the Hormuz Straits was understood as the fighting went on. I think that's...
It became understood.
It became understood.
Was it misread at the beginning?
I'm not sure it was misread, but there's a great risk for Iran to do it. And it took a while for them to understand how big that risk is, which they understand now.
Because of the blockade? Because
of the blockade, and that's actually a brilliant move by the president. I think it's very smart. And I don't think they calculated, I think they didn't calculate the response that this would have. Yes, they could cause a global dislocation of markets, trying to take over an international maritime route. They could do that, but they should have understood that that would eventually cause a reaction that was very powerful, and that is now collapsing their economy. So that people understand, that we understand that, yeah, they could do it, but then they wouldn't do it because they understood what would happen if they did do it. I don't claim perfect foresight, and nobody had perfect foresight. Neither did the Iranians. They should have figured out that that's what's coming.
Did you say that most of these risks would be minimal?
I don't remember using that language, and
would that be a fair interpretation?
No, I would say that the overall conception was that this would elicit a response that they probably would not shoulder, but they did shoulder, and now they're attacking. They're being attacked accordingly.
My colleague Nancy Cordes spoke by phone with President Trump today about the Netanyahu interview, which he said he watched. Nancy, I understand the president had a somewhat pointed reaction to what we just heard from the Israeli Prime Minister.
Right, Major. Overall, he said he thought the interview, which he did watch, was pretty good in his words, but he did take issue with Netanyahu's claim that it wasn't possible to have perfect foresight about the fact that the Iranians would do as much as they have to hold up the strait and choke off global oil supply. When I asked President Trump about that today, he said, actually, he did have the foresight. He knew it was going to happen. He said, I knew they would close it. That's the only weapon they have. It's not much of a weapon anymore. So the president disagreeing with his main partner in this war, Bibi Netanyahu, saying that he was well aware of the risks that he was taking on when he started this war, and he still believes that he is going to be triumphant at some point in getting the Iranians to reopen the strait.
Nancy, the other big question is, what is the state in the president's mind of the current ceasefire with Iran?
Well, he had some choice words for Iran today. You know, over the weekend, he said that the latest Iranian proposal was totally unacceptable. So I asked him today what it was about that proposal that was unacceptable. Was it the fact that they weren't willing to make concessions on their nuclear program? And he said it was everything. It was just a bad proposal, a stupid proposal, badly written, badly delivered. And in remarks in the Oval Office, he said that the ceasefire itself, which was already on shaky ground, is now in even more trouble. Take a listen.
It's unbelievably weak, I would say. I would call it the weakest right now. After reading that piece of garbage they sent us, I didn't even finish reading it. They said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support.
He said he may return to Project Freedom or something, in his words, more severe, but he wouldn't say what that more severe option would look like, Major.
Nancy Cordes, before I let you go, very quickly on the federal gas tax, the president told you something interesting about what he has in mind and how that might address a very noticeable and uncomfortable spike in gas prices nationwide.
Yes, he's said he's very open to suspending the federal gas tax. That would mean that gas prices would drop by about 18 cents a gallon. As soon as he said that, Republicans in Congress began drafting up legislation immediately to impose a 3 to 6 month pause in the gas tax. Democrats had already proposed something similar a couple of months ago, so it looks like this may be heading down the track, Major.
Congress would need to be involved. Nancy Cordes, thank you so very much. I spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister about where the war stands and what it would take to end the conflict. Please listen. Is the war with Iran over? And if it isn't, who will decide when it is?
I think it accomplished a great deal, but it's not over because there's still nuclear material, enriched uranium that has to be taken out of Iran. There's still enrichment sites that have to be dismantled. There's still proxies that Iran supports. There are ballistic missiles that they still want to produce. Now, we've degraded a lot of it, but all of that is still there, and there's work to be done. President Trump.
This war cannot end until all those things are eliminated.
Well, certainly we want to get the nuclear material out. We certainly want to get the enrichment sites dismantled. We've curbed a lot. We've degraded a lot of the missile production sites, but the agreement should cover all these areas, including the proxies. Can it end with, as President Trump has led now, a blockade and economic pressure on them to do it with non-military means? Fine. If it can be accomplished, why not? But if not, both the United States and Israel, we both agree, President Trump and I, that if necessary, we can re-engage them militarily if it's necessary.
If it's necessary. How do you envision the highly enriched uranium will be removed from Iran?
You go in and you take it out.
With what? Special forces from Israel, special forces from the United States working in tandem under international supervision? How?
Well, I'm not going to talk about military means, but what President Trump has said to me, I want to go in there. I mean, he said that publicly. He said it, and I think he's right. He's very committed to this. And I think it can be done physically. That's not the problem. If you have an agreement and you go in and you take it out, why not? That's the best way.
What if there isn't an agreement? Can it be taken out by force?
Well, you're going to ask me these questions. I'm going to dodge them. So you can ask me that second time, third time, and I'll dodge it second time, third time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to talk about our military possibilities, plans, or anything of the kind. And I think you understand that.
I do understand that. But it's of great concern to the American people and the people of Israel how long this will take. And absent an agreement, what kind of things should they prepare for?
I think the most important thing for people to understand in America and in Israel, I think they do understand it, but for in the world, in Europe, you have to understand Iran that declares not merely death to Israel, but death to America. That's what they want to achieve. They don't not only want to kill Americans, which they have, killed and wounded them by the thousands, burnt up your embassies, killed your Marines, burned your flags, tried to assassinate the President of the United States and some of your chief officials several times. They're committed to destroy America. They say that, okay? Their commitment involved their plans over the years to build nuclear bombs and the means to deliver them to the United States. They were very close to developing a nuclear bomb, okay? Very close. In fact, if we hadn't done the 2 military operations that we did, they'd have a bomb within now or within a month or two. Now, you don't want a fanatic regime like that hates America, that has no compunction of murdering its own citizen, murdering and wounding tens of thousands of its own citizens. You don't want them to have nuclear weapons. That's what prompted President Trump and me to go out and stop them, prevent them from having that.
And I'm just trying to get at how long is it going to take to achieve that aim?
I'm not going to give a timetable to it, but I'm going to say that's a terrifically important mission because you don't want Iran to have ballistic missiles to reach any city in the United States with nuclear warheads because no American would be safe. And I think President Trump understood that from the start. I know that he understood that from years of discussion with this. You know, I came to the United States in 2016, right before the elections. Because I made it a habit to meet with the candidates of both parties, either in America or here. So I go to 2016, it's right before the elections, and I meet with Hillary Clinton, and then I meet with Donald Trump in New York. The first thing he says to me in Trump Tower is, we can't let Iran have nuclear weapons. I'm going to walk out of that terrible Iran deal. Jump forward 8 years later, there's another election. I meet President Biden and Kamala Harris in Washington, and then I go and meet Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And the first thing he says to me, even before I sit down, he says, you know, Bibi, we cannot let Iran have nuclear weapons. I'm not going to let it happen. So he's infused with this mission.
What do you think changed from the first term to the second term? Because it was a phrase he spoke to you in 2016. It's action he took with your government now.
Well, I think in the first term, he believed, as did I, that we could enforce sanctions, a sanctions regime, which he did, and basically bring Iran to...
its knees, which is a phrase he used.
Yeah, well, they stopped exporting oil, you know, and just reduced it completely. He hoped that that would work, and it did for a while, but it didn't really stop them. I would say it slowed them down, but it didn't stop them. Then they went back to enrichment. They went back to their full efforts on to develop a nuclear weapon. And what changes is that they were very close to achieving it. That's what prompted the action. And it amazes me, frankly, you know, when we talk about it, people ask, what is the purpose of this war? What's the point? The point is not to let a regime committed to the destruction of the United States and Israel, they call us the little Satan, they call you the big Satan. What do you do with the big Satan? You have to remove it from the world. That's their doctrine. Not to let such a regime have nuclear weapons, because it's very different if, I don't know, let me pick a country. If Holland has nuclear weapons, it's not the same as the Ayatollah regime that calls for your destruction having nuclear weapons. So that's what prompted these military operations.
Mr. Prime Minister, what is your evaluation of the state of the Iranian regime today? Is it just as well composed, well organized, and fanatical as you just described?
I think it's at the weakest point it's been since it hijacked the Iranian people and took
Since
over.
1979.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the weakest it's been. The hardliners are just as hardline as they were before, but there are fissures in the regime. I mean, there are cracks in it because they've been hit very hard by our joint efforts, our joint military efforts. We destroyed a lot of their money machine, their petrochemical plants, their steel plants in which they produce the raw material for these rockets and ballistic missiles and other things. We hit them very hard, and so it causes now a debate within this with this regime. Some say, let's keep on trucking, and others are saying, if we do, our economy will collapse and the people will rise. That's their real fear. The people will rise because they're really afraid of the Iranian people. So they are, there's a debate. They're weak. They're certainly weaker than they were before, but it's not over and the jury's still out. I'm the first one to say it.
Former U.S. National Security Advisor in the first Trump term and CBS News contributor H.R. McMaster joins me now. H.R., I'm always glad to have you with us. You watched the interview. You've seen what we just played. Your reaction to what you heard from the Prime Minister?
Hey, Major, great to be with you. And a great interview. I'm glad that we got a chance to hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Hey, I agree with the guy. When you look at the nature of the Iranian regime, it's permanent hostility, to the United States, Israel, its Arab neighbors, the damage, the suffering, the death and destruction that they've inflicted on so many for 47 years. I agree that this is really a campaign to end a war rather than a new war itself. So I think that was a really important point. And also, Major, I agree with his assessment of the weakness of the regime. I mean, so much of the reporting has been about, I guess, how strong they are and everything. Well, I mean, I think from the perspective of Ayatollah Khamenei and the leadership there, they're not very strong. Of course, there's been a great deal of upward mobility, in the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps ranks and the ranks of the government, because so many of them have been taken out by the initial phase. If you look at the attrition on their military as well as on their industrial base, now the effects, the economic effects of the blockade on Iranian ports are losing about $450 million a day. Unemployment is skyrocketing, hyperinflation. I think they are in a profoundly weak position, but what they're encouraged by, Major, is they think they can maybe affect our will, right, by these attacks essentially on the global economy and on the Gulf states' economic model and so forth.
You heard, H.R., my conversation with the Prime Minister about highly enriched uranium inside Iran, how to get it out, which he identified as a preeminent priority. The only way to guarantee that this nuclear ambition of Iran is ended is to get that highly enriched uranium out. How difficult is that going to be?
Well, it'd be difficult and it'd be lengthy. I mean, there's not, you can't do like a quick strike, and get it out. I mean, if you knew exactly where it was, which I think we probably do, you would have to secure a broader objective area, probably including an airfield, and fly in some of the capabilities to get it out. You'd have to dig it out. Then you have to have specialized teams remove it. Remember when Kazakhstan, when Ukraine, others, gave up their enriched uranium at the end of the Cold War, oftentimes it took months to extract that material that was already in containers and so forth.
And
so
that was on a voluntary basis, HR. If this is involuntary, this is a messy military situation, straight up.
It is. And I think this is why President Trump is increasing the coercion of the Iranian regime. I think really what he wants to do is to get it out by assent, to have the Iranians say, okay, hey, enough of this. We forswear a nuclear weapon. We'll go to no enrichment. We'll agree to that. And you can extract, this 1,000 pounds. Now, of course, it's a lot less than the enriched materials that were in the former Soviet states. Right. But it's buried. You got to dig it out. And then you're going to have to fly it out. And if you're doing that in a contested way, this is a major and a protracted, military operation. HR,
as you know, this is a global economic conversation. You also are well aware that President Trump travels to Beijing later this week to meet with Xi Jinping, the leader of China. I want to play for you what I asked the Prime Minister about what we picked up while we were in Israel from various sources about nervousness within Israel about continued military support from China to Iran. Please listen.
I'd like to ask you about what you know, because in our conversations here the last couple of days, we picked up some interesting suggestions about this, about China providing materially valuable military support to what remains of the Iranian regime. True?
China gave a certain amount of support on particular components of missile manufacturing. But I can't say more than that.
Does that disturb you?
Well, I didn't like it, but I think that if China weighs its interests, does it really want to have Iran controlling the waterways to supply the energy that China needs? Would it not prefer to have open waterways that are not subjected to this kind of violent blackmail? You know, not everything is a zero-sum game. Just as, you know, if you think about it, you know, I'm talking about the brilliant future of AI, but there's dangers in AI, a lot of dangers. It's not just a simple proposition. So you have to advance the benefits and contain the dangers. Would it not make sense, and I'm sure it will, for President Trump and President Xi in their upcoming meeting to talk about advancing humanity's benefits out of AI, but jointly controlling the dangers that could be quite frightening. So, you know, it's not everything is a zero-sum game, and I don't think everything is a zero-sum game when it comes to Iran. Do you really want to have a fanatic regime with nuclear weapons that is committed to Islamist revolutions? That's what Iran's Constitution says. We're committed to export the Islamist
China should
revolution. So China, I think, should think about.
Because it's apparently doing it right now.
Could be. I don't want to speak for China. I don't want to speak also.
But you have eyes and ears on this.
Yeah, well, you know, but I also have a closed mouth when necessary.
HR, evaluate that answer right there.
Hey, I'm so glad you asked it. He was tiptoeing around it. He should be more direct. You know, he's typically not somebody who's going to beat around the bush. But hey, China's providing all kinds of support to Iran. Of course, China's the reason why the regime's on life support to begin with, because it's buying 90% of Iran's oil exports. It's also helping Iran evade sanctions in all kinds of ways, you know, with its ghost fleet, with these cutouts of companies, you know, front companies to launder their money. I mean, so China is a main sponsor of Iran. They entered into a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran in 2021. And hey, Major, going all the way back to the 80s, they've been giving them missile capabilities.
But HR, what does it tell you that he's tiptoeing around those facts?
I know. It tells me that he's reluctant to call out this broader axis of aggressors. He was like that with Russia for a long time, when Russia was playing the role of arsonist and fireman in the Syrian civil war. I think because, you know, Israel fears more than anything being isolated, right? I mean, they're fighting for their lives, all right? They've been fighting a six-front war, you know, since October 7, 2023. So he's trying to argue to Xi Jinping, hey, this isn't in your interest. But Xi Jinping is on the side of Iran. I mean, just in February of this year, Major, the Chinese, Russians, and Iranians did a joint naval exercise in the Persian Gulf.
HR McMaster, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Great to see you.
Still to come on the Takeout, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu admits that his country is losing the reputational battle over social media and the damage that it is doing, losing that battle to support for Israel here in America. Also, speaking of Americans, they're exposed to the hantavirus, have been flown back to the U.S., and now they are in quarantine. Plus, the suspect in the White House Correspondents' Dinner security breach makes his initial plea in court. We're on all of that when the Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to Takeout. This portion of the program coming to you from New York. Israel has seen its support of the United States deteriorate since the start and really the prolongation of the war in Gaza. It's interesting to note that right after the October 7th attacks, support for Israel was pretty solid. But a recent survey from Pew Research found that 60% of U.S. adults that were surveyed said they had an unfavorable view of Israel. That number was at 42% 2 years ago. I asked the Israeli Prime Minister about why that might be. Please listen.
We have seen the deterioration of the support for Israel in the United States almost, I would say it correlates almost 100% with the geometric rise of social media. And that by itself is not what caused it. And I don't believe in censoring them or anything, but I'll tell you what happened. We have several countries that basically manipulated social media with bot farms, with fake addresses, to break the American sympathy to Israel, to break the American-Israeli alliance because they think it's in their interests. And they do it in a clever way. It's like you hear a text message. I'm a red-blooded Texan. I always supported Israel, but I can't stand what they're doing. I'm turning against Israel. And then you trace the address to some basement in Pakistan, And that's something that has hurt us badly. While we were fighting the physical military battle on 7 battlefields, 7-front war, we were completely exposed on the 8th front, the media war, really the social media war. And, we've been busy, so we haven't seen that while they're attacking us with the equivalent of F-35s, we're trying to fight them with the Polish cavalry. It's like, it's almost what happened in World War II. So I think we have to engage on that front, not by censorship, but by finding ways that are applicable to democracies. We can't do what these authoritarian regimes do, but finding ways to fight the battle for the hearts and minds of young Americans on the social media. And that we have to do, absolutely. We have a problem, I recognize it, and we have to get our act together.
Do you in any way consider yourself responsible for that problem?
No, because I don't think that they're not only attacking Israel. They're attacking America. They're attacking America. They're trying to create ruptures within America, not only between America and Israel, but between Americans and Americans. They're trying to say...
Foreign operation bot farms.
Enormous ones. And also getting to your universities, getting to your academic curricula, doing all sorts of things.
That is a true scenario. But do you believe that's the only explanation, or is it possible that some Americans have come to a different sense of Israel because of the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, there's no
organically
question.
And through their own
you can track
inquiry?
You can track it, actually. No, I think what they see is so many falsifications and vilifications that are unfounded. But they don't know because they just get it, They just get the last reel in the movie. They don't see the entire movie. But I'll tell you what happens. We saw that several years before the Gaza war, which definitely caused us a lot of damage because it was mispresented. But I'll tell you what, it was like the Gaza war was pouring kerosene on a fire that was already there. We could see that happening. We didn't understand it initially. We didn't see it when it started going down. We didn't understand, why is it going down? What's happening here? Before the Gaza war. But now we know a lot. We know a lot. And there's that 8th front. But it's not only our front, it's also your front.
CBS News contributor Elliot Ackerman joins me now from Washington, D.C. He's a former CIA officer and Marine Corps veteran. Evaluate what you just heard, Elliot. The Prime Minister told me that was the principal problem, not a problem, the principal problem and the principal explanation for the deterioration here in America of support for Israel, social media.
Well, I think that the way the Prime Minister speaks about social media, is almost to trivialize it, that this doesn't matter. But I mean, listen, Major, fundamentally, war is a political action. And the way that we communicate politically these days is through social media. So if Israel is going to prosecute a successful war, they have to figure out how to communicate effectively, to get their message out, and to explain not only to their own people, but to the international community what they are doing so that they can sustain the required support for their war. And clearly that hasn't been going well since the October attacks.
I want to play for you something the Prime Minister told me about what he considers, in the long view, the most important Israeli accomplishment in its war with Iran. Listen.
tell you what our greatest accomplishment was. And I can count them. The degradation of their nuclear program, the degradation of their ballistic missile program, the degradation of their military industries, the knocking out of their military command and political command. If I had to cite two things, one on the operational level and one on the broader level. On the operational level, I think the most pointed success is knocking out 20 top nuclear scientists who are working on the atomic bombs to be used against Israel, America, and anyone else. And 12 were knocked out in the first minute of Operation Rising Line, first minute. And another 8 were knocked out now in the present operation. And I think taking out that amount of know-how, it doesn't eliminate the know-how, but it sets them back.
So the 12 number we knew. The Israeli prime minister had never, based on our research, said the 8 number of nuclear scientists that were targeted in this most recent operation. Evaluate what the prime minister said about that, Elliot.
I think it just further underscores, how significant the degradation of not only military capability but nuclear capability has been for the Iranian regime. But the challenge as it exists right now is to really tether those operational successes, whether it's battlefield successes or the decapitation of the regime and its know-how, to a broader vision of how this war is going to be run and what an off-ramp looks not only for Israel but also for the United States. So it's tethering operational success with strategic success.
I also asked the prime minister what he thought or what he knew about the circumstances of the Iranian regime and its new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. Listen.
What do you believe is the physical condition and operational influence of the current supreme leader?
Yeah, if you ask me what his condition is, first of all, if you ask me if he's alive, I think he is alive. His condition is, it's hard to say. He's holed up in some bunker or in some secret place. And I think he's trying to exert his authority. I don't think he has the same authority that his father, the Ayatollah Khamenei, had. I don't think so. That's also creating the disruptions in that regime, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
So it's clear the Israelis, who spend a great deal of energy, as you well know, Elliot, trying to understand the inner workings of the Iranian regime, they're still a little bit unsure what's going on right now. That was reflected, at least in my ears, of what the prime minister said and couldn't say.
Yeah, it seems as if that's right, that Mojtaba Khamenei is very much held up, really operating more as a figurehead, and his intermediaries in the Revolutionary Guards Corps are really the ones making the decisions at this point. But it doesn't mean he's not effective as a figurehead, and in many ways a strategy that really sort of diffuses power throughout the Iranian regime is probably going to be effective for their continued prosecution of the war, but we'll just have to see.
Elliot Ackerman, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I suggested, I'm out of it now. That does it for me. Today's program here in New York, because I've got to do some work for Evening News. Ed O'Keefe, my colleague and good friend, picks up our show. Please, Ed, my brother, take it away.
Major, you've had a heck of a few days, so we appreciate you spending some time with us this Monday. Welcome back. Congratulations on a news-making, agenda-setting interview, but we'll take it from here, and we're going to change topics entirely because Americans exposed to hantavirus are now back in the U.S., and they're headed to quarantine. Up next, we'll hear from Dr. John LaPook about what happens next and the current risk of spread. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington, in for Major Garrett. And now for something completely different. Those Americans exposed to hantavirus aboard a cruise ship are now quarantining back here in the United States. Most of those people are isolating at what's known as the National Quarantine Center in Nebraska. At least one person has tested positive and another is showing mild symptoms. Health officials are insisting the risk to the public is low. CBS News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. John LaPook is with us to discuss this now. Doctor, great to see you. Happy Monday. Walk us through this quarantine. What's happening right now? Why should people care?
So this is an example of when public health works, nothing happens, right? What am I talking about? Well, when these passengers were potentially exposed to the virus, the fear was that it has an incubation period of up to 6 weeks. So if they were in fact infected at any point in that 6-week period, they could suddenly start to have symptoms. And we know from a lot of research that was done that they're most infectious around the time when they start getting symptoms. And unfortunately, the symptoms at the beginning are sort of like a little flu-like symptoms, headache, a little fever, and people could blow it off and say, it's nothing, and not realizing that they're spreading it. So in an abundance of caution, knowing the science, they brought them back to Nebraska where they're going to be in quarantine. And then the really smart thing was that knowing that somebody had tested positive, apparently weakly positive, I want some more details on that from a medical point of view, but they put that person in a special biocontainment, kind of like a protective pod on the plane on the way back so that they didn't infect other people. So that's an example of when public health works, nothing happens. What's the nothing that, the something that could have happened was the person just went out to wherever they lived with no precautions, suddenly became infectious and infected other people. And then you're off to the races again because everybody who's exposed can then have another beginning of the clock of up to 6 weeks of potentially turning positive.
But was it risky for the passengers and frankly for that crew to fly them back here in the first place?
So from everything that they're telling us, no, because they had PPE, protective equipment that were on the clothes. They also, for the people who were really they were worried about when they did the assessment, they put them in these protective pods. Remember back in the day of Ebola, they used those then, right, when they were bringing people back to the United States. When you're not sure, what you don't want to have happen is for somebody to seem to be fine, suddenly mid-flight they get symptoms, and then you go, uh-oh, too late, we've infected others. And instead, they put them in these protective pods, so it was not dangerous for the other people. And if it turns out that they said weekly positive PCR, remember that from the days of COVID, this is not COVID, but the weekly positive PCR, if that turns out to be true, then that was a really great move.
In our remaining minute or so, I'm curious about two things. One, you can't help but think about coronavirus, and how would you compare this response to that 5-6 years ago, and the strains that have been put on the CDC and the federal public health system, especially in the last year or so? How does this stress test that? What are you concerned could happen given the changes that have occurred? I'm just going to say,
and this is totally different. I'm going to just say this is not going to be a pandemic. The virus is a totally different. You know, we had never seen coronavirus. We know hantavirus, been around for 30 years, this strain. We know about it. People, of course, have PTSD for the pandemic, so they go like this. Yeah. The reassurance from the WHO and the CDC is helpful, but what is really reassuring is the science, is knowing that there's basic public health effect and response where you do boots on the ground and you have contact isolation. And the people who have the contact, they think they've been exposed, you put them in quarantine. It's basic stuff that we know how to do. So people should not think this is going to be the next pandemic. I understand that they do think. I will end with this, with the 5 seconds I have left. This is think of this as a mini stress test. Right? It turns out that, I think it's going to be okay. It's, there may be a few more cases, but what if it had been a lot more infectious? Are we really prepared, given, as you alluded to, some of the cuts that have been made in our preparedness? I think that's a good thing to talk about the next time you and I get together.
Well, hopefully it won't be about hantavirus spreading, but it's always good to talk to you, sir.
Just theoretically.
Right.
Take care.
All righty. Dr. LaPook, thank you from New York. We appreciate it. Coming up, another group is now trying to block more of President Trump's attempts to change iconic parts of Washington, D.C. Why renovations of the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool may now be in hot water. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. A preservation group is suing to block the Trump administration's changes to the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial. President Trump announced a plan to resurface the bottom of the pool in American flag blue. It would cost about $2 million. Well, the New York Times reported today the firm that won a no-bid contract for the project is instead being paid more than $13 million. The lawsuit claims the contract was awarded without a proper bidding process and that the project didn't earn congressional approval. The man accused of attacking the White House Correspondents' Dinner last month pleaded not guilty today. 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen is facing multiple charges here in the district, including attempting to assassinate the president, assaulting a federal officer, and other firearms counts. Allen's lawyers are also moving to have the Justice Department officials overseeing the case disqualified, including U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia Jeanine Pirro and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, claiming they have publicly presented themselves as victims in the case since they also attended the dinner. Coming up, today's CBS News Radio Flashback brings us to the Middle East and how Americans first learned the details of Operation Desert Storm. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. We end tonight with our latest tribute to CBS News Radio with a clip from more recent history. The beginning of the Gulf War against Iraq and 1991's Operation Desert Storm. Here's CBS News Radio's coverage before the U.S. launched major military action.
Now, direct from CBS News, this special report. This is Mitchell Krause, CBS News, New York. CBS News has learned that President Bush is planning a major military response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And CBS News reporter Jim Stewart is at the Pentagon. And Jim, what can you tell us about this new Bush administration move?
Major air and ground forces are scheduled to leave for Saudi Arabia late this afternoon, part of a U.S. commitment there to defend that nation from invasion from Iraq.
CBS News Update. I'm Randy Riddle. Disturbing news this morning about the 2,500 Americans trapped in Kuwait. Standing by with a live report now from the State Department, CBS News correspondent Bill Plant.
CBS News has been told that Iraqi military authorities in Kuwait have instructed Americans and all Britons to assemble at various hotels. The Britons have expressed concern that this could mean an interning situation where their nationals would be taken and put away for the duration of the war.
The first shots fired in this Gulf introduction effort came from the fast frigate Reed. It happened at about 4 p.m. today, Gulf time, when the Reed encountered an Iraqi tanker, challenged it by radio. When the tanker would not stop, the commander of the Reed got permission from higher authority to fire warning shots across the tanker's bow. He did so, not one, but 6 of them. The tanker apparently still did not stop. What happened then is not clear.
Israel saw retaliation from Iraq for joining the U.S.-led coalition. In our next clip, you may recognize the voice of current CBS News contributor Robert Berger, who was reporting for CBS at the time from Jerusalem.
Now, from the Oval Office, here is President Bush.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
And this is Doug Poling, CBS News, New York, with the continuing coverage of the Persian Gulf War on the CBS radio network. Robert Berger in Jerusalem, our reporter there. Robert, are you there on the phone?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm speaking through a gas mask.
Yes, I can. Tell us what's happening.
Well, there has been an announcement on the radio that Israel has indeed come under a missile attack. Residents have been advised to put on their gas masks. I'm here in the room with my family. We're wearing gas masks. My 2 little girls are in enclosed tent kind of things. My wife and my mother-in-law and I are all wearing gas masks.
I am at an air base in eastern Saudi Arabia. We are now under attack. There have been incoming explosions at this base over the last several. The air raid sirens are on. Just a few minutes ago, the sirens sounded briefly, and we began hearing explosions in several places here on the base. There were at least a half dozen explosions and the sounds of jet engines overhead.
That was another familiar voice, Scott Pelley. The closer we get to today, you may start to recognize these radio voices a little more. Now, as the U.S. made advances in Kuwait, Iraqi forces withdrew and set fire to oil wells there. Here's how they were described.
From this ship at this moment, looking towards Kuwait, I can see the entire coastline on fire. I have counted nearly 40 separate huge columns of flames and smoke rising thousands of feet above the shoreline, and beyond them, the night sky glows with many, many more. It looks tonight as if all Kuwait is ablaze.
At 9 o'clock yesterday morning, there was bombardment from every direction, from a warship, presumably the Wisconsin or the Missouri out in the Gulf, from artillery and overhead from bombers. And under that cover, the tanks that had arrived from it's a mile from us along the border, and moved into position. So the front moved up. We at first light this morning can't see them. We don't know if they're still there. We don't know if they've moved over the night. But one thing we can tell you is that the bombardment last night, and it continues to this moment, has been exceedingly heavy, heavier than anything we have heard.
Iraq's occupation of Kuwait officially ended in February of 1991, bringing a celebration from the U.S., its allies, and residents of Kuwait.
The people streamed into the streets, men, women, children by the thousands, screaming with joy. Resistance fighters and the Allied troops who entered the city at mid-morning, firing their weapons jubilantly into the air. The throngs carried hundreds of the black, white, red, and green Kuwaiti flags, waving them with abandon.
That's our CBS News Radio Flashback for today, and that does it for this special edition of The Takeout. For Major Garrett in New York, I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. The Daily Report is coming up next.